Well, hello everyone. My name is Max Cook. I am BTS Spark Head of Canada with my colleague Sean Slade, Head of US East for BTS Spark. And we're really pleased to have you join us today for this webinar. I think, right off the bat, principal retention is a big preoccupation with BTS Spark as it relates to coaching as a tool that can support principals and price principles. Um, I just wanted to say, Sean, in the US, Max here in Canada, we're leading by example. Canadians and Americans can still collaborate effectively to solve issues. And here we are, and we
Here we
work on a
are.
daily basis. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, Sean, to have you join me for this session. So over to you to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about the format for this being kind of a brand new format and webcast for BTS Spark.
exactly. And don't let the accent fool you. Yes, originally from Australian, but I do have US citizenship. Been here for 20 odd years. So yeah, we're leading by example, Max. Collaboration, relationships, trust, and loyalty. Anyway, let's get back to the webinar. So what we're doing with this, we're aiming for this webinar or webcast, because it's similar to a podcast, to be in three sections. And this will be an ongoing theme. The first section where Max and I will talk you through will be framing the issue. And this issue is how to retain your principles. We're then going to jump to hearing from a series of experts that we've been talking to, and we have some thoughts and ideas and suggestions. So that's really a deeper dive into the discussion. But then, since we're talking about sparking solutions, we're now then going to turn it over to one of our professional coaches. This time it's Lacey Jacobs to talk about what the coach would do in this situation. All of these, by the way, are going to be viewable not only and downloadable, not only as an entire episode, but you can also go back and just get the pieces you want out of these sections.
Yeah, so I mean, I love this format, just to sort of give you an overview of who we're showcasing today. Two Canadian educators who also have coaching accreditation, and I think that's a beautiful mix of perspectives to have, and you'll hear from them in terms of how principals are doing this year. Then over to Mark Brackett, who really offers some insightful pieces about leadership from a higher level. And then, one of what my favorite piece is the fact that we're going to showcase one of BTS's coaches who coaches principals, vice principals, superintendents. You get a chance to listen to those insights from someone who's done this for many years. And, we're really pleased to be able to showcase that, to put a face, an actual face to our coaches to give you a sense of what, folks could expect when they're meeting a coach and getting some support. So all of this in far less than an hour, Sean. Let's get to it. Look forward to working with you through this.
Exactly. And there's always some apprehension when people hear about coaches and what coaching is. And so we think it's actually good for you to hear it straight from the coach. All right, you know who we are, Max and Sean. So let's jump into it right now. And I imagine with the people on this webcast, most of these facts you may have already read or seen or heard of, but this one comes from the Learning Policy Institute, and also the secondary school principals came out with a report just recently talking about the number of um, principals surveyed that are considering leaving their positions. And it's something that's been growing over the last couple of years, pretty much for obvious reasons, as well as we've gone through COVID and we've gone through post COVID. But what was interesting was when they looked at the reasons, it's not just the outside pressures that are coming in, but it's really how the leader is trying to respond to those pressures. And so they put it into two areas, one of workload of self So your own personal well-being, your own personal stress that you're carrying around, but it's also the workload of others. And then when you look at those, the workload of others, we're not talking about instructional walkthroughs or scheduling or some of those duties and tasks of leadership. But we are talking about leadership generally. We're talking about collaboration, engagement, staff and student well-being, including mental health, um, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been again in the news recently, and building relationships. And so when I look at it, I almost see that it's a pivot point or a watershed between the old style of leadership and what's needed in the new style of leadership. A lot of the principals who are feeling burnt out are the ones who are carrying the weight and pressure of others on their shoulders. They're also trying to run and lead in a traditional way in terms of the tasks and the duties of leadership, but they're being required and requested to actually be more of a group leader at the same time. So their duties and their responsibilities continue to increase. Here's an example of a quote from one principal that talks about, yeah, emotionally and physically, it's taking its toll. And really, you can't continue at this pace. It's somewhat of a truism that the higher up that you go in your careers and the higher up that school leaders go, whether it's becoming a principal or going into the district office or a superintendent, you get more people to look after, but you actually get fewer peers and people that you can reach out to and connect to. So your role is becoming more onerous and more isolated at the same time. And by isolated, I don't mean that you're necessarily in a rural area. I mean isolated because you don't have people that you can turn to. Part of that, as we'll hear from Lacey later on, is because of our own fear and apprehension in asking for help or maybe even just asking advice of other people. Many of us still have this idea that we need to be the all knowing, all seeing, all doing leader. And to be honest, that's an unworkable situation. Let me give you a little example. This is principals leaving the profession. And as you can see, it's been increasing over recent years. What this doesn't show in this graph, and this was the latest one I could find, it doesn't show what we've gone through the last 4 years. So it doesn't show the burnout and principals leaving during COVID years. It doesn't show what the burnout and the pushback has been in the post-COVID years. It doesn't show mental health that's really risen, not only in students, but communities and also educators themselves. It doesn't talk about or show the introduction of artificial intelligence, which may not be as dramatic as COVID, but it is making changes to what we do and why we do it. It doesn't show the recent policy changes. It doesn't show the VUCA world that we are entering. If you haven't heard of the word VUCA, it actually comes from the US military in the 80s, was adopted by business, and basically describes the world that we're entering into, one that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And I think we can all sort of relate to that in the current times. So imagine that the numbers are going to probably increase and increase quite dramatically.
Yeah, Sean, I mean, in listening to you, it just brings up thoughts from the stakeholder leaders I speak with, and that school leaders are more discouraged than they've ever been. In a place maybe over 10 years ago where Leaders would have been proud and very content with their leadership roles. They're just discouraged. And I think, in listening to you, some of this, because of the potential mental well-being aspects of this and the little bit of stigma attached, considering the traditional leadership role of a principal and vice principal, all knowing, as you said, difficult to show vulnerability, particularly in a public arena. And I think it's that under the radar of this issue, you have to ask yourself, why is this not a bigger issue even in the public domain when we're losing school leaders and the effect that that can have on students, on staff, on the school community culture? So in Canada, it was much more difficult to get some stats on how many principals are actually leaving the profession. So largely what I'm hearing is anecdotal, but it's a crisis, and this is what I'm hearing. But I did find some data from various sources that paint a picture of why principals are leaving from various angles. If we look at this one here that comes from People for Education, which is a pan-Canadian advocacy group that I appreciate a great deal for their knowledge mobilization. They do a principal survey every year to get a sense of the trends and the pulse of principalship. And so this particular graph comes from um, 2019 or 2022. And basically, if you look at this, and I've sort of highlighted this, and I'll work through these quickly, only 29% of principals agreed or strongly agreed that their recent levels of stress felt manageable. That's not a good sign. If we go to the next one, and this one is a little bit older, pre-pandemic, also from People for Education, only a small proportion of principals report that their most time-consuming task is supporting professional learning and improving the instructional program. And I think most principals are pedagogical, they want to be pedagogical leaders, but it's the administrative burden. And the other pieces, if you even see the completing the SIP, incident reports, dealing with parents, school community, uh, and then violence. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the upcoming slides. There's so much coming at them. It's really, really difficult for them to be instructional leaders in their own schools. So moving to the next one, when we talk about mental health, again, this is from 21-22. So thinking that there's pandemic, post-pandemic, this one in particular, only 1/3 of principals agreed or strongly agreed that their school has the resources necessary to support the mental health and well-being of staff. And, let it be known, the main focus of any principal is going to be the well-being of students. And that's really where the focus is. And we know that there's a crisis there as well in North America. But think about that. Like only 1/3 of principals believe that there are enough resources to support their own teams themselves. That's very problematic when you consider everything that's coming at them. The next slide. Certainly wanted to showcase a bit of work from Dr. Katina Pollock from Western University in Ontario. Clearly in Canada, one of the leading voices with her co-researchers with respect to administrative burden on principals and the effect of that. This one in particular, we're talking about workplace safety. When I looked at this, I went, wow, like principals don't feel safe in their own workplace, and a fairly significant percentage. Surprisingly, that sense of lack of safety, if you look at the sources here that are circled, parents, staff, students, and even union representatives have been marked within this research as making principals feel unsafe in their workplace. That to me was quite surprising as someone who follows these trends. You can see, like, if you can't feel safe in your own workplace, then that's also a significant barrier to your own well-being and your own ability to perform as a leader. So we go to the next one, again from Dr. Pollock from Western University. This one, you can look at it two ways. And Sean, you and I had a bit of a debate about this as data interpretation. I kind of viewed this as saying if just over half of principals felt supported at work, and 1/3 feel socially excluded, to me, that was problematic. But I guess it depends how you look at it, right? Like I
It's
know
the
that we had a
glass
bit of a
half
debate.
full. Yeah, glass half full, glass half empty. Yeah.
I mean, ideally, you'd at least want to have 90 to 100% of principals
Mm.
feeling supported in their workplace. So this again was fairly surprising to me, and I guess I'm a glass half empty fella. So, anyways, and then just the last, the one I had here, and this comes from the Wallace Foundation, albeit US based. There's been an uptick since 2012 of novice principals taking on complex school leadership roles. And I know that's also happening in Canada. We have a lot of lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, and you're going to have a hungry young vice principal, young principals who are amazing leaders who are going to take that on. But are they ready? Do they have the managerial capacity? Do they have the diversity, equity, inclusion backgrounds? Are they able to handle this exceptionally difficult task and exceptionally needed in school communities? And I would hazard a guess that there are similar trends in Canada as well.
Yeah. Well, you almost think about it. You're putting inexperienced leaders into brand new positions at a time when the experienced leaders were getting burnt out, and so they're going in there without experience, without a network, getting wanting to prove themselves. So I think, unfortunately, we're looking at a bit of a recipe for more principals getting burnt out.
I think you also have to realize, as a new principal or vice principal, you're coming into an existing culture. You can have the best ideas, but if you can't build those trust, don't have the time to build those trust and relationships first, you're going to run into a few brick walls along the way. And I think I'm seeing that happen, or hearing of that happening in many instances. So just to look at these final pieces here of data, one from an organization near and dear to my heart, Education Canada, Canadian Education Association, EdCan Network. If you look at research showing that principals burn out and leave the profession in 4 years or less, but it takes 5 to 7 years for a principal to have a significant impact, you're losing principals before they even reach
Mm.
the vision that they hope to attain to transform their schools. And, to me, that's the most tragic thing when the system that we can't find ways to support them to a point where we can have preventative measures that keep them in their roles. And I think this is really the crux of what's driving me to be focusing on this work. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, and it's one thing that, we talk about how the culture of the school and the location actually comes down from leadership. And so if you have stressed leaders, if you have stressed superintendents, if you have stressed principals, that is going to flow down into the school at the same time. Yeah, we paint a bit of a bleak picture here, but we don't want to sugarcoat it, and we don't want to undersell the situation that we're in. Education is going through a momentous change, just as society and community is going through a momentous change as well. And rather than just bringing more younger people into those roles without trying to respond to the stresses that we know about, is just foolhardy. We're going to burn people out. They're going to leave the profession. And unless we start to change some things, it's going to be a continuous cycle.